Welcome to the News Roundup for Monday, December 15, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. An attorney whistleblower sounding the alarm and alleging a massive Medicaid fraud scheme in Ohio's Somali community. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar demanding answers from the Department of Homeland Security and accusing them of racial profiling for their actions in Minnesota. And a bombshell congressional report revealing the D.C. police chief downplayed crime in our nation's capital to make terrible numbers look better for the public. Also, President Trump praising the brave hero who disarmed a gunman during Australia's deadly Bondi Beach terror attack. And breaking details concerning the brutal double murder of Hollywood director Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, their own son now in custody and accused of the crime. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we'll begin with this. A whistleblower in Ohio now alleging that Minnesota is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Medicaid fraud, and warning that members of the Somali community in her state have been stealing millions of dollars from taxpayers. And this has been going on, they say, for more than a decade. And this just keeps getting worse and worse. Attorney Mahek Cook says she's personally been approached by a number of medical providers who say they've been under extreme pressure to become part of an enormous ongoing Medicaid scam. Now, according to Cook, the scheme involves doctors who approve and then rubber stamp home health care payments to family members of elderly people with fake medical conditions. She goes on to say that those family members are, in actuality, scammers who are exploiting a loophole in Ohio's Medicaid program, which allows them to receive astronomical payments up to nearly six figures a year for providing personal care to their elder relatives. Even more reprehensibly, she claims the doctors who authorize those payments then receive kickbacks for their part in the scheme. And we hope you're outraged by this. And if you are, then please drop us a note in the comments section, and sincerely would love to hear your thoughts. Now, the attorney blames the problem on criminals within the Somali community, whom she says are clever enough to have figured out a way to game the system. Says they're exploiting a loophole which allows just about anyone to become an at-home health care provider, that 99% of the scammers have been coached on exactly what to say, and that in reality, most of them don't qualify for any kind of benefit at all. Absolutely reprehensible. She also says the entire Somali community is not to blame, and that the providers who warned her about the scheme are afraid for their lives, claiming they'll be stoned to death if anyone ever finds out what they've done. That's a pretty lofty claim. The lawyer goes on to warn that, in her opinion, the entire system is breaking down because there's simply not nearly enough oversight. Says that after state agencies develop their programs and put them into play, there are basically no further independent assessments at all. Even more frightening, she claims that what's going on right now in Minneapolis is nothing compared to what's happening in Ohio. And she's urging every state in the union to immediately ask for an independent audit of all of their Medicaid programs. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. If you're infuriated by everything that's unfolding down there in Minnesota, then you'll be mortified by all that we've shared with you regarding the fraud that's taken place under the watchful eyes of that state's governor, Tim Walz, and the esteemed Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Now, here comes the icing on the triple-layer corruption cake, and it's even got a cream center fraud filling. Minnesota has rightfully been the center of attention for a good chunk of time, but issues of Medicaid fraud appear to be a bit more widespread. Also, if these allegations prove to be accurate, get ready for some deep investigations. And it's the Somali community right now that's being very heavily scrutinized. For our friends and associates in Ohio, it's your tax dollars that are possibly being pilfered, lifted, purloined, if you will. And it's the responsibility of the state to hunker down, dig deep, find out if these allegations are legit, and if they are, put the fix in right now. And by the way, before people start complaining, this is not an ethnic issue. It doesn't matter which segment of the population is committing an alleged crime. All that matters is that we demand full accountability with regard to how our tax dollars are being allocated, to whom, also where, and why. With that, over to that high karate aftershave wearing producer, Big Bad Davey Ross. Now, Davey, this is a developing story. It's beginning to sound like Ohio. They're sort of turning into the new Minnesota with regard to fraud and junk. And where's your head on this one?
Well, Bill, we've been hearing from lots of listeners about alleged fraud taking place in their own backyards. And I think this lawyer's probably right. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's already pretty bad. So if you're a resident of Ohio, contact your representative. Get involved. Find out if your hard-earned tax dollars are being doled out inappropriately. That's your money, and you don't want to see it getting wasted on junk. Turning our focus now to Minnesota and Representative Ilhan Omar, who's issuing a bunch of demands to the Trump administration and accusing them of inappropriate behavior for their aggressive actions against the Somali community in Minneapolis. In a couple of angry letters to the Department of Homeland Security, the Congresswoman claiming that the recent flood of ICE agents into Minnesota comes as a direct result of what she calls President Trump's racist comments about both her and the entire Somali community. She also says that local officials have proof that there's been blatant racial profiling and unnecessary use of force taking place, claiming those actions are more befitting of a social media blitz than legitimate law enforcement efforts. Omar goes on to demand answers from Team Trump on behalf of her constituents, arguing their constitutional rights are being violated on a daily basis. Also asking DHS to release all relevant information concerning the ICE operation, including the number of people arrested, its estimated cost to taxpayers, and why the department is potentially removing temporary protected status for hundreds of Somali refugees. The Congresswoman says she can't imagine a clearer example of waste, fraud, and abuse than what ICE leadership has unleashed on the Twin Cities. Now, I'm just thinking out loud, but doesn't that billion-dollar fraud scheme kind of qualify as fraud and abuse? Congresswoman, hello? Waiting. Additionally, Omar is claiming that federal agents have taken their harassment a step further by pulling over her son, asking him for proof of citizenship. She says that over the weekend, ICE stopped her son when he made a trip to Target. Fortunately, he had his U.S. passport with him, and that eventually they let him go. She also claims the incident backs up her claim of racial profiling and that previously ICE agents entered a mosque where both she and her son were praying, looking for illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, in related news, the House Oversight Committee ramping up their probe of Governor Tim Walz. Republican lawmakers say revelations concerning both the scale and scope of Minnesota's welfare fraud schemes are so enormous that they represent either total incompetence or complete dereliction of duty. That's a double whammy. They all say that they find it difficult to believe that Walz and his team had no idea what was going on and that they plan on leaving no stone unturned in their investigation. It all sounds like fun, or something like it. And final thought. This is the News Roundup Lowdown. It seems to me that Ilhan Omar is trying once again to deflect, change the subject, turn her and others into victims, and then go on the attack against the Trump administration. That's a goofy strategy. Hey, 47 is acting on intel which suggests that portions of the Somali community in Minnesota are taking part in gang violence, fraud, and more, then deploying ICE personnel to that state, to that region, to investigate, detain when necessary, and if legal, deport certain individuals, then he'll do so. It's his job. ICE agents in her community, they should be the last thing she's concerned about right now. And instead, perhaps she should focus her deep care and concern on all the taxpayers who are now on the hook for millions and millions of dollars worth of fraud, which occurred in her district and on her watch. That Omar is concerned about what she calls ICE-related waste, fraud, and abuse, mildly humorous. Has all the makings of a low-rent sitcom produced for a public access cable TV station in a small town, somewhere in middle America. Her focus right now, it should be on the actual fraud. More deflection. Her son was involved in a traffic stop and nothing happened. Keep trying. Also, this programming note, America, quit picking on Timbo. The Timmer, Tim Walz. People have left comments for us here stating that Brother Walz was a failed candidate for vice president of the United States. And that's actually kind of accurate. But long before that epic failure, he was already a failed governor of the state of Minnesota. So take that, America. And producer Davey, this is the gift that just keeps on giving. You feel me? What are you thinking about this?
It looks like Omar's trying to fight back on behalf of her people as best she can, but it doesn't look like her complaints are going to do anything to stop what's happening in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's beyond the pale. Save your state, Minnesota. The governor and the congresswoman should immediately exit stage left and allow new leadership to get that state right back on track. This has been going on for far too long. All right, changing topics now and turning our attention to a troubling revelation coming out of Washington, which backs up President Trump's decision to deploy National Guard troops in our nation's capital. According to a shocking new congressional report, D.C.'s police chief used her position to bully subordinates into downplaying crime stats all over the city. The report was made by the House Oversight Committee with the help of top commanders from throughout the Metropolitan Police Department. Those officers say that Chief Pamela Smith directed them to manipulate how crimes were classified in order to downgrade them and thus make the department's stats look a little bit better. They also say they were urged to shift more serious offenses into lesser categories by any means necessary, in part because those lesser crimes are not reported to the public. The document goes on to say the pressure coming from the top to downgrade crimes was so intense, the threat of retaliation was so severe that morale plummeted throughout the entire department, forcing several experienced officers to walk right out the door. One Republican lawmaker says the chief's decision to deceive the public by fudging stats is extremely dangerous, in part because it undermines trust in both law enforcement and, of course, in local leadership as well. Meanwhile, Chief Smith, the top boss, has already resigned from her post effective at the end of this month. However, some people are calling for her to step down right away, saying that for safety's sake, the end of her term couldn't come soon enough. Final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. You can play with the numbers, present false data, manipulate all manner of reports, but the bottom line is this. Folks who live, work, and attempt to get around D.C. are all in the know, and they know life is not as safe in our nation's capital as the chief of police would lead you to believe it is. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that President Trump deployed National Guard troops to D.C. to ensure safety and clean things up just a bit. You'll also recall that just late last month, 2 National Guard personnel were shot in D.C., one victim dying and the second person still recovering. The chief of police has, in my estimation, buried her head in the sand and has done very little to promote safety and security in Washington, and that she'll soon be replaced as news that will most likely be well embraced by all who want and are in fact deserving of a superior way of life. Hey, Producer Dave, you are a Washington insider. You're in D.C. or near D.C., and in the interest of public safety, tell me what you're thinking. Should Chief Pammy step down today or stick around like she wants to do until New Year's Eve? What do you think?
Well, Bill, I think she's probably doing what's right for law enforcement by allowing for a smooth transition.
Yeah.
But undoubtedly, the sooner she's gone, the better.
Yeah, fudging numbers, that doesn't benefit anybody. Washington, D.C., it's the epicenter of our country. People from all over the planet, they come to visit and to do business with the USA. And therefore, D.C. should be absolutely pristine, safe and pristine. And right now, it's a bit of a quandary, a bit of a mess. All right, switch things up just a bit and turn our sights now to a story involving democracy, freedom of the press, and the oppressive Chinese communist regime. This is important stuff. A former newspaper publisher from Hong Kong now staring at life behind bars after being convicted in China for allegedly committing 3 national security crimes against the state. Among them, conspiracy to collude with foreign forces as well as sedition. The 78-year-old journalist is a longtime critic of the Chinese Communist Party. I am as well. And he was the founder of a since-closed pro-democracy newspaper called Apple Daily. So his conviction following what amounts to nothing more than a mock trial in a kangaroo court is drawing international condemnation. All across the planet, lawmakers and human rights organizations say he was found guilty simply for supporting democracy. They say the trial was a complete joke. They're calling for his immediate release. And they say if the West doesn't act soon, China will spread their lawless authoritarian model throughout the world. In the meantime, this victim of their brutal regime has already been in jail for more than 5 years since he was first arrested, and China has reportedly kept him in solitary confinement the entire time. And quite simply, that in itself is torture. Now, a couple of additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And so, first up, President Trump mourning the loss of life in this weekend's deadly terror attack in Australia. The death toll from that mass shooting, at least 15 victims, with dozens more injured. Meanwhile, the president also lauding the very brave hero who risked his own life to disarm one of the 2 gunmen allegedly responsible for the crime. Now the hero, a local fruit shop owner, now recovering in the hospital with a GoFundMe account, which was set up to help him out and now surpassing $1 million. Closer to home, former Vice President Kamala Harris making it crystal clear to any and all potential rivals that she's still weighing another potential White House run. That'll be in 2028. Among recent indicators, an expanded book tour, also an appearance before the Democratic National Committee, and a ramping up of highly critical rhetoric. And in Washington, a stunning admission from President Trump, who's now admitting there's a decent chance the GOP could actually lose control of the House in next year's midterm elections. And now breaking developments from Hollywood concerning this weekend's brutal murder of legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle. According to reports, the couple were allegedly knifed to death in their Brentwood home by their drug-addicted son, Nick, who's already been arrested for the crime and is now sitting in jail and without bail. Those same reports claim the killing took place less than 24 hours after the trio had a very loud argument at Conan O'Brien's Saturday night Christmas party. Authorities say that 32-year-old Nick has been battling drug addiction for years, that he's been in and out of rehab more than a dozen times, and that his mental state was in shambles. Additionally, they now say Nick's sister Romy was the one who initially discovered her murdered parents before cluing investigators into the likelihood that her brother had committed the crime. Meanwhile, tributes for the fallen couple, they're appearing by leaps and bounds with many of Reiner's Hollywood comrades, praising his incredible body of work. And among his classic movies as director, this is Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and so many more. And of course, his legendary role as Archie Bunker's son-in-law, Michael Stivic, or they called the Meathead on the program, the classic sitcom All in the Family. Now, I'm mildly familiar with Rob Reiner's politics, and while I'm in disagreement with most of what he stood for and what he said, he most certainly had every right to voice his opinion. I know less of Mrs. Reiner, but clearly this is a tragedy that would have been absolutely unimaginable as recently as just a few days ago. And sadly, they're both gone now. And I can tell you that over the years, it's been an absolute joy to follow the trajectory of Rob's monumental career. As far back as the 1960s, he and Steve Martin wrote for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS. Also did a legendary job, as we just mentioned a moment ago, on the 70s TV program All in the Family, also on CBS. And you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who would argue that he was, in fact, a one-in-a-million storyteller and movie maker. Two of his best films, in my mind, Stand By Me and the legendary Misery, James Caan and Kathy Bates. Now, Producer Davey, any thoughts on Rob or Mrs. Reiner?
No, it's a horrible, horrible tragedy. Yeah. And, he made so many great movies and provided such great entertainment for millions of people. So, the whole thing is horrible.
Was there a favorite of all those films he did? And I think we mentioned this is Spinal Tap. And didn't he just do a new Spinal Tap, a follow-up? Yeah,
he did. He did a new sequel to Spinal Tap. And we forgot to mention The Princess Bride, which is also a classic. So, I mean, Stand By Me, as you've said, Misery, A Few Good Men. I mean, his body of work speaks for itself.
Yeah, and he was just 78, and had he had a chance to live on, I think he had a bunch of additional stories to tell down the road. He will be greatly missed. Now, our condolences go out to Mr. and Mrs. Reiner's extended family and all those who've been affected by all that happened this past weekend on Sunday afternoon in LA's West Side community of Brentwood. And by the way, if you have any thoughts, comments, anything you want to share with us regarding this terrible tragedy, please check in with us. Leave a comment for us, and we'll share your comments as well with everyone else on this channel. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Monday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day here on the program, we share with you what we think is a very notable quote. And these words of wisdom come to us today from J. Paul Getty, who said, "No one can possibly achieve any real and lasting success or get rich in business by being a conformist." Getty was an American businessman, an oil magnate as well, who founded a petroleum empire on his way to becoming one of the wealthiest people in the entire world. He was a bit of a Jeff Bezos in his time. And now time for us to bust on out. But before we go, don't forget the News Roundup motto. Ask not what your podcast can do for you, but what you can do for your podcast. And all we ask you to do is simply hit that subscribe button right over there. And that way you never miss even a single episode. With that, have an awesome day today. Stay safe, and let's begin to dim the lights. We're going to fade to black, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon.